What if I told you that these chaotic, world-shattering weeks are not random? That they follow a predictable four-stage cycle that has repeated itself with terrifying accuracy for centuries? And what if I told you that by the end of this video, you will see the unmistakable signs that this cycle is already in motion today, and that we are currently in the third stage, the very stage where the ruling class begins to systematically confiscate the wealth of its own people? This isn't a political theory. It is a historical pattern, a playbook written in the blood and lost fortunes of millions. Let me take you back to Paris, 1789. The air is thick with the smell of baking bread and the acid scent of revolution. But I want you to picture not the starving peasant, but a man named Joseph Foulon. Foulon was a wealthy financier, a minister to the king. He was the 1% of his day. When rumors of famine spread, he was accused of hoarding grain, of saying, "Let them eat hay." The mob, fueled by a rage they themselves didn't fully understand, hunted him down. They dragged this old man through the streets. They beat him, and in a final, grotesque act of symbolic justice, they stuffed his mouth with hay and then severed his head, parading it through the city on a pike. This is not just a story of violence. It is the raw, unfiltered beginning of the wealth confiscation phase. It is the moment when abstract economic grievance becomes physically violent, when the crowd identifies a face for the enemy, the face of the wealthy elite. Foulon's story is a brutal preview of what happens when a society enters stage 3. It is not just about taxes or laws. It is about the complete dismantling of the existing economic order, person by person. This is the terrifying truth we must confront. Revolution is not a single event, but a virus that progresses through 4 distinct, predictable stages. Stage 1 is the legitimacy crisis. This is when the population stops believing in the system. The government, the media, the institutions, they all begin to look like a corrupt puppet show. Think of the French monarchy, drowning in debt and decadence while the people starved. Think of Tsar Nicholas II in Russia, completely detached from the suffering of his subjects as they bled in the trenches of World War I. The people no longer see their leaders as legitimate. This is the incubation period for the revolutionary virus. Stage 2 is the radicalization of the middle class. This is the most critical and most misunderstood part of the cycle. It's not the poor who drive a revolution to its conclusion. It is the educated, property-owning middle class. The lawyers, the doctors, the journalists, the shopkeepers. These are the people who feel the squeeze of a collapsing economy most acutely. They have the most to lose, and they are the ones with the education and organizational skills to create a new political reality. In the American Revolution, it was the merchants and landowners. In France, it was the bourgeoisie. They provide the intellectual fuel and the organizational backbone for what comes next. And then we arrive at the point of no return, stage 3, the wealth confiscation phase. This is the heart of our discussion today. The radicalized middle class, now in alliance with the mob, gains control of the state's power, and the very first thing they do is not to build utopia, but to tear down the old order by legally and then extra-legally seizing the assets of the wealthy. This isn't looting. This is state-sanctioned, systematic plunder. It is dressed up in the language of justice and equality, but its true purpose is to fund the revolution and eliminate any rival power base. In France, this was the infamous law of suspects and the mass seizure of lands from the nobility and the church. In Russia, it was Lenin's decree on land and the outright nationalization of all private property, from factories to farmyards. In Cuba, it was Fidel Castro's agrarian reform and the expropriation of all American-owned sugar mills and private businesses. The pattern is chillingly consistent. The new regime identifies the enemies of the people, and then it takes their stuff. Your bank accounts, your land, your retirement funds, it all becomes a political tool for the survival of the new state.
Now, you might be thinking, That's a terrifying history lesson, but it could never happen here, not in the modern world. But the mechanisms of wealth confiscation have simply evolved. They are more sophisticated, more insidious, and far more effective than a mob with a pike. Let's look at the case study of Cyprus in 2013. This was a quiet, technocratic rehearsal for Stage 3. One weekend, without warning, the government of Cyprus, in conjunction with the EU and IMF, simply froze every bank account in the country. Then they announced a bail-in. If you had over 100,000 euros in your account, a portion of it, your money, was simply taken from you and converted into shares of the failing bank. Overnight, private savings were confiscated to save the system. There was no violence in the streets, just a click of a keyboard. The depositors were the new enemies of the state, the new Joseph Foulons, sacrificed for the greater good. This is the modern blueprint. It's not called theft, it's called a financial stability measure. And the tools are already being sharpened. Consider the central bank digital currencies, or CBDCs. They are sold to you as a convenient, modern form of money. But in the wrong hands, during a Stage 3 crisis, they would be the ultimate tool of control and confiscation. Imagine a government that deems your political views, your travel, or even your diet as socially undesirable. With a CBDC, they could not just freeze your account, as in Cyprus, but they could program your money to be unusable for certain purchases, or they could impose a negative interest rate that slowly erodes your wealth, a silent, digital confiscation. This is not science fiction. The research and development for these systems are underway in over 100 countries right now. This is the 21st century guillotine. It doesn't take your head, it simply renders your economic life null and void.
So how did we get here? How does a society slip into Stage 3? It begins with the language of justification. The narrative is always the same. We must pay our fair share. It's for the common good. We have to solve this national emergency. In France, it was liberty, equality, fraternity. In Cuba, it was patria o muerte. The noble slogan is used as a moral cover for a massive transfer of wealth and power. We are already seeing this language being deployed today. The calls for extreme wealth taxes, the vilification of billionaire space races while the economy struggles, the constant rhetoric pitting one economic class against another. This is the intellectual and moral preparation for Stage 3. It is the process of dehumanizing the wealthy, of turning them from citizens into targets, just as Joseph Foulon was turned from a man into a symbol of oppression. The emotional hook of fairness is the most powerful weapon in the revolutionary arsenal, because it is so difficult to argue against without sounding selfish. But history shows us that the definition of the wealthy is always a sliding scale. Today it's the billionaires, tomorrow it's the millionaires, and eventually it's anyone with a savings account and a house. This is the emotional roller coaster of the revolution cycle. There is a perverse joy for the masses in seeing the mighty fall, the same joy the Parisian mob felt. There is shock when you realize the cold, hard historical facts and see them mirrored in today's headlines. There is a sense of reliability in this four-stage pattern. It is a grim constant of human nature. And it sparks an intense curiosity. Where are we now, and what happens next? But this is not meant to leave you in despair. The purpose of this knowledge is inspiration. The inspiration to prepare, to protect what is yours, and to understand the game that is being played so you are not just a pawn on the board. We have now laid the groundwork. We've seen the brutal birth of Stage 3 in the French Revolution, its cold, modern rehearsal in Cyprus, and the digital tools being built for its future implementation. But this is only the beginning.
The most critical question remains, what exactly happens during the full execution of Stage 3? And what comes after the plunder? In Part 2, we will dive into the specific step-by-step playbook of wealth confiscation. We will expose the 5 specific tactics that every revolutionary regime uses to strip citizens of their assets. We will reveal the one asset class that has consistently survived every single wealth confiscation phase in history. And finally, we will arrive at the chilling conclusion of the cycle. Stage 4, the new tyranny, where the revolution completes its work and a new permanent power structure rises from the ashes of the old. The story of Joseph Fallon was the spark. What comes next is the fire.
We have uncovered the brutal reality of Stage 3, the wealth confiscation phase. We saw it begin with the raw violence of the Parisian mob and evolve into the quiet digital theft of the Cypriot bail-in. We identified the language of justification and the sophisticated tools being prepared, but understanding the phase is not enough. To truly defend yourself, you must understand the specific sequential playbook. The confiscation of wealth is not a single event. It is a process, a 5-act tragedy that has played out on the world stage again and again. Today, we will walk through each of these 5 tactics, from the most subtle to the most overt. We will expose the machinery of plunder, and in doing so, reveal the culmination of the entire cycle in Stage 4, and the single most important asset class that has consistently walked through this fire and emerged intact. The first tactic, and the most insidious, is the silent thief, inflation. This is the government's preferred method because it is slow, deniable, and affects everyone unevenly, creating the illusion of a problem with the economy, not with the government itself. Think of the Weimar Republic in the early 1920s. The German government, buried under war reparations it could not pay, made the conscious decision to print money. At first it was manageable, but then it accelerated into a nightmare beyond comprehension. There is a famous story, a photograph from 1923 of a woman stoking her kitchen stove with bundles of banknotes. It was literally cheaper to burn money than to buy firewood. Another man famously ordered a coffee at a cafe for 5,000 marks. He ordered a second, and the bill was 14,000 marks. The price had nearly tripled between sips. This is what Stage 3 confiscation looks like in its early, soft form. It doesn't take your money from your bank account, it simply evaporates its value. The government, by creating endless currency, is secretly transferring the wealth from anyone who holds cash to itself. It is a tax on savers, on the retired, on the cautious. It is the most cowardly form of theft because the culprit can always point to vague global forces. But make no mistake, it is the foundational policy of a regime entering the final stages of the revolution cycle, and we are witnessing its early tremors today in the deliberate, massive expansion of the money supply that has devalued the life savings of millions. Once inflation has destabilized the system and eroded public trust, the state moves to tactic 2, capital controls. This is the moment they lock the doors. It is the transition from soft confiscation to hard control. The state realizes that scared capital is mobile capital. People will try to move their money to safety, to another country, to a harder asset. The state cannot allow this. It needs those funds within its borders to continue funding its operations. So it slams shut the gates. A modern, chilling example is Greece in 2015. Overnight, the government imposed strict capital controls. ATM withdrawals were limited to 60 euros per day. You could not transfer money abroad without special government permission. The lifeblood of the economy, the free movement of capital, was clotted. Imagine being a Greek small business owner who needed to pay an international supplier. You couldn't. Imagine needing to access your own savings for a family emergency abroad. You were trapped. Your money, in a digital sense, was no longer fully yours.
This is not an ancient history lesson. This was less than a decade ago in a core European Union nation. Capital controls are the dress rehearsal, the moment the population is put on notice that the financial system is now an instrument of state control, not of individual economic freedom.
With the population now trapped within the system, the state unleashes Tactic 3, the direct wealth tax. This is where the language of fairness and shared sacrifice reaches its logical, violent conclusion. It is no longer about income, but about the wealth you have already accumulated. It is the state laying claim to a percentage of your net worth. The most infamous recent case study is not from a communist revolution, but from a European democracy, Spain. In 2021, Spain introduced a solidarity tax on large fortunes. It was presented as a temporary measure to help the less fortunate. But anyone who studies the revolution cycle knows there is nothing more permanent than a temporary government measure. This is the legalistic, polite version of the mob identifying Joseph Foulon. It creates a registry of the wealthy, drawing a bright red target on their assets. Once such a tax is normalized, the threshold for who qualifies as wealthy always, without exception, slides downward. It begins with the billionaires, then the centimillionaires, then the millionaires. Eventually, it encompasses the upper middle class, the doctors, the engineers, the small business owners who have a paid-off house and a robust retirement account. In the eyes of a state desperate for revenue, your 401k and your home equity represent a vast, untapped resource. A direct wealth tax is the formal declaration that your private property is not truly private. It is a social resource that the state can allocate as it sees fit. When legal taxation reaches its political or practical limits, the regime pivots to Tactic 4, forced voluntary contributions. This is where the line between law and crime begins to blur. The state cannot outright seize everything without causing total collapse, so it engineers situations where you are pressured to donate your assets for the national good. The most terrifying example comes from Soviet Russia under Stalin. In the early 1930s, to fund his brutal industrialization drive, the Soviet government orchestrated a campaign to pressure citizens to purchase state bonds. These were not voluntary investments. They were a form of soft confiscation. Workers would be encouraged at party meetings to donate a portion of their wages. Refusal could mean being labeled a saboteur or an enemy of the people, with consequences ranging from job loss to a one-way ticket to the gulag. The money was taken, but the facade of participation was maintained. We see modern echoes of this in the growing social and corporate pressure for ESG scores and stakeholder capitalism, where the free flow of capital is directed not by market returns, but by social and political objectives dictated by the state and its allied institutions. Your investment portfolio is no longer just yours. It is a tool for social change, whether you consent to it or not. Finally, when all other methods are exhausted, or when the revolution requires a dramatic symbolic victory, the state resorts to Tactic 5, outright expropriation. This is the final, naked stage of wealth confiscation. The masks come off. The state simply uses its power of law or force to take what it wants. We saw this in Cuba after Castro's revolution. One day, you were the owner of a successful cigar factory or a sprawling cattle ranch that had been in your family for generations. The next day, a government official arrived with a piece of paper, declared your property now belonged to the people, and gave you hours to vacate. There was no compensation, no appeal. Your life's work was gone. This same tactic is now being openly discussed in policy circles in the West, under the banner of redistribution or reparations. The moral justification is being carefully constructed in academia and media, preparing the public for what was once unthinkable.
This is the final destination of the wealth confiscation phase, the legalized negation of private property itself. This five-tactic playbook, inflation, capital controls, direct wealth taxes, forced contributions, and outright expropriation, forms the core of every Stage 3 revolution. It is a grim, relentless process. But what comes after the plunder? This is where we arrive at Stage 4, the new stability or the new tyranny. This is the final chilling consolidation. The revolutionary fervor burns out, the mob is exhausted, and a new, permanent power structure solidifies from the chaos. The wealth that was confiscated is not distributed to the people. It is used to fund and entrench a new ruling class. The idealists from Stage 2 are often purged, labeled as counter-revolutionaries. In their place rises a cold, bureaucratic state, a party or a military junta that controls all economic life. This is the Soviet Union under the Politburo, a stagnant empire built on the graves of the kulaks and the seized factories of the bourgeoisie. This is Cuba, not in the heady days of the revolution, but as a one-party state 6 decades later, where the revolutionary generation still holds an iron grip on power and the economy. The new stability is often a period of bleak peace, but it is a peace purchased with the total surrender of economic and political freedom. The inspiring joy of overthrowing the old tyrant has curdled into the grim reliability of a new, perhaps even more efficient tyranny. The shock of confiscation gives way to the dull ache of a controlled existence. But within this darkness, there is a single, brilliant thread of hope that runs through all 4 stages. Throughout all of human history, through every hyperinflation, every bank freeze, every confiscatory tax, and every expropriation, one asset class has consistently preserved wealth through the fire of Stage 3 and into the bleak landscape of Stage 4. Scarce, tangible, non-sovereign assets. In Weimar Germany, while paper marks were being burned for heat, an ounce of gold could still buy a fine suit. In Castro's Cuba, while businesses were being seized, families who had quietly converted their wealth into portable diamonds or foreign gold coins had the means to escape and start anew. This is the ultimate historical lesson and the source of true inspiration. When the state moves to destroy the representative of value, its currency, you must own the thing it cannot create, debase, or easily confiscate. You must move your wealth from the financial system into the real, physical world. This is not speculation. It is the single most proven historical insurance policy against the entire revolution cycle. It is the power to remain an individual when the system demands you become part of the collective. We have now journeyed through the complete 4 stages of the revolution, from the legitimacy crisis to the radicalization of the middle class, through the 5 brutal tactics of the wealth confiscation phase, and finally to the grim consolidation of the new stability. The pattern is clear, the historical evidence is overwhelming, and the early warning signs are flashing in the world today. This knowledge is not a curse, it is a shield. It is the power to see the storm on the horizon while others still see clear skies. The emotional journey ends not in fear, but in clarity and empowerment. You now understand the entire game. The question is no longer if the cycle is turning, but what you, with this knowledge, are going to do about it. The time of observation is over. The time for preparation is now.